Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color.
Are you trying to mute me? No, it's just you're real loud, and I can't.
I sold Amazon, but it was $25.
Listening to listen, not listening to respond.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. Okay, Josh Hanna. I am super excited. We were talking about doing this series where I'm learning things from people, and we were discussing like who I wanted to bring on the program, so to speak, and you were at the top of my list because I said he's going to show me Photoshop stuff, and I know a little bit about Photoshop, but I was like, he'll show me Photoshop stuff that I really don't know anything about, and I will legitimately be learning, because there will be some times when I'm talking to people where I think they're going to be showing me something I really know, but it's not just for my benefit, it's for anyone else who sees it. And, you know, there will be times where I ask questions where I know the answers to the questions, but I'm doing it maybe for the benefit of other people. In this case, with you, I'm fairly confident that there's going to be a ton of stuff where I have really no idea what you're doing or how you're doing what you're doing. So I'm super excited to do this. Now, you already said something. Did you say blend if?
Blend if.
Now, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
I know what blending is, and I know what the word if means.
Well, we're going to combine those two words to create a new concept. How about that?
Okay. I'm ready. Let's see it.
Maybe not a new concept, because Photoshop thought of it way before I did.
Sure.
So the idea of blend if is telling Photoshop how we want a layer to blend with the other layers it's interacting with.
Okay.
Right. So the power of Photoshop, in my opinion, is the fact that you can layer things.
Yes.
So you can stack effects up and create layers. So we're going to take advantage of this ability of Photoshop to layer, but then tell it how that layer affects other layers.
Okay.
And then I want to walk through 2 or 3 scenarios on how this same technique applies to different things.
Uh-huh. So
it's one of the most, when I first learned this, it was one of those literal mind-blowing moments that changed the way that I edit. So that's what I thought I'd start with. So here's what we're going to do. I've got this scene kind of set up here with this senior, and I purposely dropped him. I made this background very blue, so it's contradictory to the light currently falling on him.
Well, and we're already looking at a composite. I mean,
yes.
right away, we already have something that's been composited. I can see that in the layers.
We've got our subject here, got our skies, and I even changed the color of the sky here.
Sure.
So what I thought we would start with is using this blend if to change the color of this lighting on our subject to more match the sky.
Okay.
All right. So you can approach photography with like shooting with gels if you want to do colored light, or you can somewhat fake it in Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the approach we want to look at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a blank layer down here, and then I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can take a closer look. So what I'm going to do is grab a brush here. I've got the flow pretty low here. So
can you explain flow?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So let's do this. If I drop in, just say like a solid color layer here, like black, and I grab my brush and let's go 100. So we got opacity 100, flow at 100, and let me do a blank layer. So if I paint, this is what we expect to see.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I've got a soft edge. You can see the edge of the brush is 0. Yep. If I change opacity, let's lower that to say 12%. And I paint with a single brush stroke, we get this 12% opaque kind of stroke. Mm-hmm. And if I release and do another brush stroke, it will start to build up one layer, kind of one brush stroke at a time.
Yep.
So the difference with flow is if this is at 100 and I turn flow down to say 1%, within one brush stroke, I can start to casually build up a more refined, softer edge. So it's more like actually painting.
It's like really painting, right?
And so that allows us to do some much more refined editing. So that's what we want to do.
Well, since it's there, then can you also talk about smoothing real fast?
Smoothing on the brush.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about it because I don't use it a ton.
Right. Which is fine. I just noticed it's set at 10%.
Right. And that's kind of the default. And I believe it smooths the brush stroke to a degree. But honestly, I've never found a need that I've said, I need to learn what this is.
See, I think that's so interesting because Photoshop is one of those things where there's a billion different options, right? And there are so many things that exist that depending on what it is that you're doing, it may not apply to you in the very least. And as far as you know, for this, you don't need to worry about it. And
I have learned enough to know that at some point, someday, I will see a YouTube video, an educator, somebody use that smoothing, and I'm going to go, I should have been using that 10 years ago. Also that. Okay. Smoothing's at 10, but that was a nice flow exercise. That helps me with flow. Yes. Yeah, flow is super. It's one of those controls that you have to be using that if you're doing any kind of detailed editing. It's just a must. Okay. All right. So I've got this blank layer here, and what I'm going to do is use my brush, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option. I'm going to sample a background color, like one of these highlights back here. So this blue, and I'm just going to paint over our subject, and it's going to look like a horrible, horrible mess. Right. That's okay. And so paint over, anywhere where this bright highlight's coming in. And we'll just worry about the face right now. We won't worry about the entire body. So something kind of like this. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to clip this layer to our subject. So in other words, if we hold Alt or Option and click in between these two layers, we can see we have a subject layer here. So just a quick overview on what a clipping mask is. I actually have some dodge layers in here. Let's get rid of that so it's not confusing. Okay. So we've got our subject. We've got this layer that I painted on above it. And I want this layer to only affect the subject layer. So in between the two layers, I can hold Alt or Option and I can click, and it's going to create a clipping map. You see that little icon pop up when you're going over the two layers, and then you hold Alt or Option, and it actually creates the clipping mask, right? Correct. And so what we see is it's actually clipped this mask to the subject edges and everything. Right. So once we have that, what we're going to do is change this layer blending mode down to color. So you can already start to get a sense for what's going to happen here, right? So the trick now is we want that to kind of fake this lighting. So it needs to show up just on the lighting, not on the shadows. Okay. And so that's where blend diff is going to come into play. Okay. Let me refix that. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the layer here. And that's going to give us our trusty little layer style pop-up box. And so this exists right here in the middle. Oh, there it is. And a lot of people don't even know that it exists because we're too busy messing around with all the cool stuff over here. I am one of those people. Okay. So in particular, we're going to look at this bottom bar that says underlying layer. And so when you look at this, what I want you to think of this almost like a histogram. If you're familiar with your camera histogram, everything on the left is shadows, everything on the right is highlight. And we actually have the RGB for that here. So 0 is black, 255 is white. Yes. So what we're telling Photoshop at the moment on this layer, I want this layer to show up where the underlying layers have a lightness value between 0 and 255. So that would be everything. The whole thing, yeah. The whole thing. So that's why it's showing up on the shadows and everything. Currently, right. So we're going to say blend if our values change, okay? So in other words, if I move this slider and you watch the face, see how it starts to peel off of those shadows? Yep. Because now we're saying, okay, now when the underlying layers have a lightness value between 86 and 255, in other words, this gray and white, I want you to show up. Yep. And so it gets a little choppy, but we can refine that. We can hold the Alt or Option key and split this now into two little refinement sliders. And so now as we push this up, now we're saying, okay, I want you to show up on the layers between 143 and 255 lightness value. Yes. But between 0 and 143, I want to do a smooth transition, a gradient. Goodness. Okay. I got it. I got it. So then we can adjust each of these little sliders individually. And now we go to something like that. Right. So pretty cool, right? It's insane. Like all of the pieces have been there for me, right? Like everything that you said individually makes sense to me, but I've never considered putting them all together because I didn't know that the blend diff was a thing, but it totally makes sense.
And that's how
Yeah,
you
so-
make that. It looks like he's there, right? And
One
then
of the ways, yes.
the highlights have that color introduced into them, essentially, of his surroundings.
Correct. And you could continue to build on this. Like for instance, since we already have the blue set, the blend mode set, and now the blend diff is set, we could just come in and paint, anywhere these heads
Everywhere else.
Now there's
and
one
those
exception.
settings are all there. Now you can do it on the shirt too. Like where does?
Well, so here's one exception. See, if we do the shirt, it's not very strong, right?
Right.
Because the shirt falls in a lightness value that's outside of the range we set.
Yep.
So all we would need to do is basically do a new layer and do the same thing. Set the color.
Clip that down.
So if you wanted to color this, we would do this whole same thing again. And then we would refine with a new blend if
and bring
that's
it
more set for the shirt.
Right.
So yes, you can get to the shirt, but it might take another layer. But you can see how we start to kind of introduce that.
Right.
And
But as far
beauty,
as like all of the highlights that are relatively similar, you can use that same layer and paint with a flow that allows you to then control the intensity of that color as well.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
And so the beauty is once you have that set, you could do like a Command or Control U to do a hue adjustment and then just make that whatever color you want.
Yeah, if you want to tweak it a little bit, even like if you're like, oh, that's a little too dark, or that's a little too light, or maybe I want to change it to make it a little more purple or a little more magenta.
Right.
Okay.
So,
man,
that kind of stage one of why blend diff is so cool. Okay.
I think it's fantastic.
And so what we're going to do is I'm going to drop over to another example here, and we're going to show it. The blend diff's going to do the same thing. It's just different application.
Okay.
So in this one, instead of lighting, we're going to talk about shadows. So I'm going to zoom in down here to the feet because we know with a composite, shadows are huge. If the subject's not grounded to the ground, it's just going to look like he's floating on a weird
Just
background.
cut and paste. Right.
So what we're going to do, we got our subject layer here. You can see I've already got some feet shadows in. That's kind of easy, right? Little contact shadow there. So what I'm going to do is another blank layer. We're going to grab the brush. This time we're going to set it to black. And I'm going to keep this flow pretty low again. And this time I'm not one of those guys who think when you add shadows that it needs to be this like 100% realistic, like where you're like taking the subject, duplicating, flattening, making them black, trying to stretch and like that's too much for me. I'm not that smart.
Right. Or patient.
Right. So we're just going to fake this to make it kind of simple. Okay. So I'm kind of looking at the overall scene here.
Yeah.
More or less, the brightest part is up here at the top of the sky. So I'm kind of envisioning this light just falling down.
Right.
Okay. So with that in mind, if I just take a soft brush here, I'm going to do this in a couple of different layers. The first, we're just going to softly paint that nice soft edge brush, kind of a dark spot right under the subject. But then what we're going to do is jump in here to our layer style, and we're going to refine this blend if. This time, instead of going from this side up, which kind of looks funky, we're going to go from this side down. And so if I split this, Alter Option Split, and lower it, if you watch the grass here, you're going to see some of those little blades of grass pop out. All
right. So wait, to split that, you're holding Alter Option down in order to split that triangle into two pieces?
Correct.
Okay, good.
And so now what we're saying is now we want this to show up on just the dark parts. In other words, where the underlying layers between 0 and 88, and then blend between 2 and 9. So we're getting kind of this real life effect where you would have taller pieces of grass that would pop out.
With the highlights that are still showing through, where the highlights are still bouncing off at the tops of those pieces of grass.
Correct. So if we turn the preview off and on, we go from the kind of that flat, just blah kind of shadow to something that looks more like that.
Yes.
And so if let me zoom out just a touch, because then what we're going to do is just do another layer. And we're just going to do the same thing, but we're going to go a little bit wider.
Yep.
Because remember, as shadow falls, it kind of casts out, it softens, it spreads as it goes out. So we're just kind of faking that a little bit. And then we're going to use that same blend if again and do the exact same thing. So maybe something kind of like that.
It's fantastic. this is one of those things. So I feel as though like a really good composite is held together by a tremendous amount of little details, right? It's not like one big, here's like the big easy button for this composite, right? Like you want a decent extraction. You want like the meat and the potatoes, right? But I feel as though like what separates the men from the boys, so to speak, right? When it comes to composites are all the little tiny things that you throw in here and there. And that those little details in and of themselves build, right? To make it something like, oh, that is, and it's not even something that the untrained eye or just the layman or even like me, I would look at that and even if you didn't do what you just did and you had that little shadow under there, I would know that, yeah, he made that shadow under there and that's a pretty good job. But then to see it like this takes it that much further and makes it that much better. And to know these little tips and tricks and to know how to create these little details here and there, it just elevates your work, man, to another level, doesn't it? Yes.
And the way that I describe it with people is like when I work on a composite, I'm not trying to make it real life per se. You know, if I've got flames on somebody's arm, I'm not trying to convince you I set somebody on fire. So good. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to cue off of what happens in real life. Sure. In other words, if there's a flame there, there's going to be light created from that flame, and it's going to have a color cast that matches the flame. So you're thinking about that with shadows. When shadows fall, like if I wanted to make this a hard light scenario, you know, you would use harder edge shadows instead of softer edge shadows. You're just paying attention to what real life is and trying to mimic that. Well, so, I mean, it's no different than going to the movies. If you see Superman, you don't want to see the strings holding the guy up. And nowadays, of course, it's all CGI. But even then, bad CGI takes you out of the film. Even if no one's thinking to himself, boy, how do they find a dude that knows how to fly? Yeah, that's not a thing. But if it's poorly done, it just yanks you right out. And then you're not thinking about the story. You're not thinking about the arc or the plot anymore. You're thinking, that just looks terrible. Yeah. Right? And I kind of use that as a checkpoint when I'm kind of running through my work. At several points along the way, I'm going to stop and sit back. And if anything catches my eye, where I say that looks fake, that's what's going to catch everybody else's eye. So it's not about making it real life, but it is about paying attention to what happens in real life. I like it. So that you can fake it. I love it. And so with the shadows, I'll throw in a big thing that a lot of people forget, in my opinion, when they're grounding somebody down, is they forget to actually shade the subject. So we're going to throw a blank layer on the subject. Oh, interesting. Clip it, okay. And then we're going to darken that same soft brush on black, and we're going to darken right up the legs like this. And then we're going to head back into that blend if. And we're going to pull this and let some of those shoe highlights and some of them leg highlights pop out here. So something kind of like that. So if we back this thing out now, we kind of go from there to there. We can even pull opacity off a little bit. But now that's on a blank layer that's clipped to the subject. So all of that work was actually only done to the subject. The background's not affected by that at all. It's just his legs. Right. And then you use the blend if again to make the adjustment. That's another one of the details. Like you just showed me exactly what it was that I was talking about. That's just another piece that you threw into the mix that adds to that realism. Yes. I love it. Yeah, because you don't, if people are looking at your composite, and this happens all the time, especially with a lot of team composites, you find yourself staring at the feet because either it looks like they're floating because there's no shadows, or the feet are too bright or something. It's like, if somebody's looking at my subject's feet, I have not done my job very well. Yeah, you don't want people to stay on the feet very long. Right. Or at all. I'd rather prefer they didn't even pay attention. You've done your job well if they didn't even pay attention to the feet. Well, wait, did he even have feet? Then you're like, perfect. Right. Exactly. That is so good. Hey, man. And so while... Oh, you have more? Keep going. I'm going to show you one more thing while we're at it. I'm not going to speak. It's just one more since we're already on this one. I'm I'm going to temporarily turn this stuff off. So we've got the grass, right?
Yeah.
Let's real quickly do, let's do a couple funky things right here. I'm going to make a line. I'm going to make another line, something like this. And I'm going to merge these two things together. And I'm going to, okay. All right. So we got two white rectangles. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to transform this, and let's do like a perspective adjustment. I think you're going to kind of get the idea of what I'm going to be going for here.
Now you did that fast. I know what you did, but explain how you changed the transform into adjusting perspective. You did like a Command T for transform.
Command or Control T to transform, and then just right click.
Yep.
And then just telling it you want to do a perspective adjustment.
Right. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So now that we have this, we're going to try and like mimic some field lines.
Okay.
And we're going to use blend if for this. And so if we double click here, let's start to play with these.
Unreal.
Maybe something about like that for now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can throw a mask on here.
Mm-hmm. Layer mask. Just
Black
with
brush.
that
really
little
low
layer mask
flow.
button. Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of like fade that into the background a little.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe throw a Gaussian blur on here. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, just to soften.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of looks like that paints on the field.
Well, that's just that's fantastic.
Turn our fella back on. What do you think?
I love it. Now, even let's say, for instance, that I'm not happy with that perspective.
Yep. So you want to change it?
Yep, I do.
Control T. So, I mean, your transform's great because it works in so many ways.
Right.
So you could just do like a regular transform, say like a Shift Alt.
And widen that out. Yep.
Make those wider.
Yep. Which I actually like.
Where you could change the kind of the depth of them by making them a little more shallow this way.
Yep. And then you could also right click that, and I'm interested in making that the backs of them fan out more, so the perspective's not so tight.
Not so wide. So we could do a perspective adjustment.
Like that. Yep.
Yep.
I'm liking it. That's just wonderful.
That's a fun little, and then you can always come through because your grass is like a lot of different shades of lightness.
Mm-hmm.
So once things start to pull off, you can either, like we could disable that mask.
Sure.
Or you could repaint over it. So keeping things non-destructive is also a beautiful thing with composites.
Right.
And you can come back in and readjust.
Which you always do with masks, right?
Yes.
That's the beauty. One of the many beauties of masks is how it's non-destructive. You're not doing something that's undoable.
Right.
I love it.
And so therein lies a few quick samples of the beauty of the blend if.
Wonderful. This is great. I'm super. I knew it would happen too. I knew that I would legitimately learn some amazing things that I can apply to my own stuff. Thank you for your time. Give your website real quick so people can come and find you if they want to.
JoshuaHannaPhotography.com, or if you're interested in sports templates, JHPhotoDesign.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. As always, it was a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Hey, guys. Thanks for watching this conversation presented by White House Custom Color on YouTube. Be sure to check out our other content and click that subscribe button right there. Right. Right there. It's there somewhere.